Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. You know, when you talk about healthy coffee, the topic of organic growing comes up a lot, natural growing practices, and I think it's often misunderstood. So today I wanted to focus the show around organic farming and the environmental and physical health impacts of different farming techniques and methodologies. And I have the perfect guest today to cover that. Organic grower and organic evangelist, Chris Trump from Natural Farming Co. is on the line. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I love what you're doing, speaking all over the world. For the audience, can you talk a little bit about Natural Farming Co. and your macadamia farm quickly?
Yeah, my macadamia farm, our family farm, is in its 30th year this year. My father started it on the Big Island of Hawaii, the northmost tip of the Big Island of Hawaii, in a little town called Kohala. And we farm 700 acres of macadamia nuts, and we produce nearly 100% of our tree nutrients and inputs on farm, on site, with stuff mostly sourced on our farm with our byproducts, and a little bit brought in from neighboring islands where they're processing fish or some bone meal. So it's a wonderful place to be, and we are experiencing productivity and profitability like never before in our farm's history. Natural Farming Company is something I've done because a lot have asked for more information on what I'm up to, what we're doing with natural farming. And so that was kind of primarily an education kind of outlet. So there's a lot of PDFs and information on free videos on how to do some of these inputs and use some of your local natural resources. And there's a lot there, even online classes.
So people were really interested in your switch. When did it take place? Your farm was in operation for some 30 years. How long have you been organic?
We messed around with organic 12 years ago as a farm and had a lot of difficulty. Our trees yellowed. We were spending twice as much on trying to feed them, kind of your traditional organic, if you will, where you just basically follow the same practices as conventional, but you're using OMRI approved inputs. And we did some composting. We tried some compost tea, and we really had a hard time feeding our trees sufficiently to be highly productive. And then, so that was kind of a bit of a wash or a loss even. And our farm was a split operation getting carried by the conventional. About 2011, we really jumped in and started doing trials on feeding the trees microbial communities in their soil as kind of a bit of a focus. So if you will, in conventional organic or regular organic, you're doing the NPK thing and really focusing on trying to get those nutrients in there from your input. In natural farming, we're relying on microbial communities to help to sustain our trees through kind of the network that nature already has for mining nutrients and making them highly available.
Mm-hmm. So it's all about feeding the soil food web as opposed to just dropping in the nutrients, because your typical synthetic bottled nutrients that anyone would go buy is, it says Cutting Edge is the brand, and it says grow, and it's got a count of NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And like you said, you monitor those levels to try and boost it up and down. And then you got your organic, as you said, OMRI listed products, the ones that have been approved to be more natural, but they're still all the bottled nutrients, right? You're still just adding things that says this is more natural. What you're talking about is like chicken poo and bone meal and like fish compost and stuff like that, right? To feed the microbes, and then they take care of the NPK count. Is that basically what you're saying?
Kind of, but I mean, I guess one step further away from that kind of put on nutrients to get results. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, kind of the chasing the nutrient mix from your basic soil test or your traditional soil test is kind of how I grew up. But now it's actually less. I mean, we do compost. We are doing that, but it's so. For example, we have this doctor who studies our soil. He runs a lab. We send him samples. We've been doing it for 20 years, and we send him soil and tissue analysis samples for analysis, and he comes back to us and he asks, "Hey, I'm seeing this deficiency in your soil. I'm seeing the same deficiency in your leaves. Add this much of this nutrient to get the better uptake in your, or get the better production in your plant." And so traditionally, that's what we're doing. Even in organic, you're running those tests. And then we started in a trial plot. We started with a 14 tree trial just for visual, kind of see what happens. And then we did 5 acres and 50 acres. And we started sending the same samples. We continued sending, and we got back strange results as far as those tests go. So now we have the same soil that we were testing before, same deficiencies that we're showing, but none of the deficiencies are showing up in the tissue. So now I've got my lab analysis, and I'm on the phone with my lab tech, the guy that runs this lab, and he's kind of scratching his head. He's like, "I don't know what's going on here. I mean, I'm seeing this deficiency, but your tissue is great. Everything's looking good. You don't show any deficiencies. What did you guys change?" And then we had to start explaining. We're doing this thing. We're boosting the microbial communities. We're tending to the fungal diversity of our soil. And now, ever since then, in our organic, and now in our whole farm, he does a soil analysis and a tissue analysis still. We still send it away. But he has a little asterisk next to our soil analysis because he always has a recommendation. Here's this deficiency. You should put on this amount. Now he says, here's this deficiency. It'll show up in this deficiency in the leaves unless high amounts of microbial communities present.
Wow.
He created an asterisk for our farm.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So we're finding, it's basically 50 years of tradition for our crop. Now we have to kind of check that assumption at the door and say, wait, maybe there's something going on here where these microbial communities are able to make available nutrients that don't even show up with your traditional soil analysis.
That is so fascinating, man. So it's still quite a developing science, but you seem to be on the kind of the cutting edge of this stuff.
We're not doing anything really that tricky though, or I mean, we're tending to it, but we're really just kind of using what nature's already doing. So it is cutting edge in that it's more complex than any of us understand, but it's not like we're responsible for it. We're actually kind of assuming that this was created well or designed to work. And if we can kind of remove our adulteration of the soil process or tend to it as it was supposed to, then we're just benefiting. We're just reaping the benefit of a great soil system.
Your neighboring farms saw your success when you switched to organic too, right? And you have a great story about how nothing motivates people faster to change their practices than positive results and positive yield and positive cash flow, right? What did your neighbors say when they saw your organic practices?
Initially it was not positive. This is our industry, the macadamia industry, was birthed in Hawaii. We actually, on our farm, have the oldest commercial planting still in existence in the world. The industry is only kind of about 100 years old, not even. And so the methods that are held to or kind of esteemed as valid are all well known in Hawaii. And so when we started saying, hey, we're using about 2% of the recommended nitrogen per acre, and we're getting, this is what our trees look like, and here are our yields. That was a pretty big wake up call. Whereas initially they said, when we're showing what we're doing, they'll be, oh, that won't work. Trees don't work with that kind of, input. You have to put this much per acre, or, there's a lot of things we do that really are impossible, quote unquote, impossible in our industry. But now they came out, we actually had the head of the largest macadamia nut organization, and now kind of the international organization, the head of the Australian Macadamia Nut Association, Julian Burnett, and he came out and he cruised through the orchard and he was like, I don't see trees like this. This is beautiful. And what are you guys doing? And I started explaining. And long story short, I ended up with an invitation to speak at the International Macadamia Nut Symposium in China and join a international research board of
Wow.
researchers and scientists. So people want to do this, but it's also a little scary because you're out without a huge group of universities backing you with all the support and knowledge that's existed so far. And that's for a farmer where everything is risk, that sounds kind of risky.
Well, let's talk about that alternative and that traditional knowledge, as you said. Why is it not feasible anymore for us to go the traditional route with these salt nutrients where you just add the phosphorus to the soil, you add the nitrogen to the soil? What is the problem with continuing to do that, and what is it doing to our soil?
You know what? It's an effective way to farm, truthfully. People are making money, people are producing food. It's not, part of the problem is it works. In that, food is still being produced. But the major thing that we're all running into worldwide is depreciating results. So the result of putting on these nutrients without a nod or a look at the microbial communities that make them available, we're finding these increased pest pressure. We're finding decreased yields, and definitely, though something we haven't looked at traditionally, decreased nutrients in the nutrient analysis of the food being produced. And that's a huge one that in the next 10 years, everybody's going to know what that means. But right now, your consumer doesn't understand this. And we're finding we aren't healthy if we're eating low nutrient food. We're getting sick when we're missing out on these complex vitamins and minerals that are in plants. So, for example, like a plant knows its nutrient needs. We understand this. It mines and seeks out and takes up the things that it needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's a wonderful thing. But when we put on fertilizer, we also know this traditional chemical fertilizer in general. And I'm kind of grouping everything together for sake of simple conversation, but there's a lot of complexity to what you can put on plants. So it's not all evil, and it's not all having the exact same effect. But generally, your big high nutrient fertilizers that are chemically produced, they aren't all available to plants. They're actually just a small amount of it is available, and then we're hoping that over time it releases. But generally speaking, it's bound up in the soil until microbial life makes it available.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, we have an orchard that we took over from a conventional farmer, and he was religious about applying this same amount of fertilizer every year for the last like 20 something years. And the first year we started tending to microbial life, like putting in diverse local microbial communities. This farm looked gnarly. This acreage yellowed and turned down. And my brothers were like, hey, this is what we're seeing. What do you think? I said, next year. Just, for trees, they take a minute to change their root structure to eat differently. And all of a sudden this year, talked to my brothers and he's like, that orchard looks amazing. We were going to do some stuff, but we're not going to do anything. This is going to be a great year in there. And so it was just, now we're benefiting from all this packed in salts that are now getting mined by a thriving microbial life. And so the trees are just benefiting from these microbial connections at their root tips, where they're able to get on-demand nutrients. They trade their excess carbohydrates for minor minerals that these microscopic fungi are mining from the soil and making available.
Wow. So this does have a happy ending. If we can tend to the soil, this is actually going to be kind of a win-win. They're happy to have at this overloaded, locked out soil, right?
Totally. And it doesn't have to be some
one or the other
thing.
Yeah.
No, I mean, people are like, oh, chemical farmers are evil. No, people that farm in the traditional way are some of the coolest, most down-to-earth people you ever meet, just trying to make a living in the best way with the best technology they've had. And
Yes.
the technology has been this recipe of, spray with this and fertilize with this. And they're just good at it, because they work hard at it. And if the initial sell is, hey, let's just add in microbes as best we can, so that they'll get bumper yields. That's what happened in the beginning. They had all this traditional farmers farming with rich microbial life in their soil, and then they brought on chemical fertilizer, and everything went gangbusters because the microbes were still there to make it available to the plants. But over time, that amount of fertilizer and then the herbicides and pesticides depleted the diversity, and it was like all the blacksmiths died and all the farmers died, and all we had left were lawyers. And
wow,
that didn't make for a good microbial community.
Man, that is fascinating.
I'm just teasing. I love lawyers. My whole family.
I love lawyers. Please don't sue me. This has been Chris Trump, everybody. I'm out. No, that's incredible, man. You have such a good grasp on this and on the history and a balanced view. I think it's a disservice to be a fundamentalist too hard one way or the other. And I just love to hear firsthand experiences from organic farmers and people who actually, like you said, get your plant tissue tested. This is a wonderful blend of kind of ancient traditional knowledge and modern analytical science. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. And the modern analytical science, this is our new frontier. This is our edge of the knowledge pool.
Yeah.
Is what's going on in microbial communities. And we don't have a clue. That's the beauty that I've embraced is I get to speak to some really wonderful doctors with their expertise in this stuff. And the truth is, we understand almost nothing about how microbial life works in community.
Jeez.
We know what one microbe does or the other one, but we actually don't know what happens when they're connected in a plant-rich soil environment and working together, where one's, discharge or, waste is being used by the other one, or how they scratch each other's back. I've watched in a microscope bacteria move up and down on the inside of a fungal hypha. I can't study about that. I don't have a bunch of papers that have been written about how fungal hyphae act like superhighways for bacteria and other microbial life. But
But you've
it
seen it.
happens.
I love it, man.
It's
I love
fun.
being on the forefront of this stuff. You know what that reminds me of is coffee. I mean, that's one of the things that's amazing about coffee is we don't know why it has so many amazing health benefits when it's brewed correctly. There's so many different compounds. It's not just the CGAs. It's not just the cafestol or the caffeine or whatever. It is a as Dr. Coffee puts it, Dr. Stephen Hellshine. It is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's an overall gestalt, and I think it's kind of the same thing with the soil food web and microbes and biodiversity. So I love being part of it, but I wanted to touch back on something you mentioned, which is, when you talk about organic farming, organic cultivation, growing practices, like the fertilizer you're using and that sort of thing is probably number one on people's minds. And then number two is what you mentioned before, pesticides, herbicides, and it's an interesting misunderstood world and there's a lot going on in it. Can you talk a little bit about pesticides? Do you feel like they're a real threat right now? Do you feel like we're moving away from the overuse of pesticides? I mean, you take a look at the herbicide glyphosate and what's happening. Speaking of lawyers, they're getting chewed apart, it seems. Talk to me a little bit about your
Yeah.
opinion on pesticides.
Yeah, it's way better now than it was before we were talking about it. So in the 70s and 80s, the stuff they put onto the land we're now farming macadamia nuts on, I work with some of the guys, they're still in our community, that, drove the pesticide and herbicide trucks, mostly pesticide, around, and the stuff that they were allowed to just dump in wells when they had a little extra, or when they needed to discharge their tanks were, you'd get thrown in jail for it now, and
Wow.
now we're using stuff with some regulation, and so we're growing as a worldwide society. The future is looking brighter, and there are some more steps to take. We need good tools. The trouble is the pitch can't be to farmers, hey, that's bad, you should stop growing food. That's not a valid sales pitch.
Right.
Because the reality is, if you take away the available pesticides in certain crops and to certain farmers, that is the pitch. Say, hey, you're out of business. How do you like that? Because they really don't have an option to farm that crop in their environment without a way to manage certain pests. Otherwise, they can't farm profitably. So what we need, and I believe, especially in the U.S., that the flag that's going to carry us forward is going to be profitability, quality, and overall production. I mean, that's the language of our farming economics. We can't pretend that we're going to do everything for philosophy only. It won't work, So what we need, and what I think is available now and becoming more and more understood, are other pest management practices other than some of these gnarly chemicals that we understand are hurting us. We are being damaged by what's available, and we want other options.
I know integrated pest management is a hot topic. If you could talk a little bit about the practices that you do use that don't involve spraying.
Sure. Yeah, I work a lot with, and we speak together at conferences. Suzanne Wainwright, she's 25 years in the integrated pest management world, and has worked a lot with the cut flower industry, and works now some with the cannabis industry. She's a great resource for going deep into integrated pest management. She doesn't sell bugs to farmers, but she makes recommendations. And the reality is, there's whole companies that supply sachets and ready-to-release packaging for every different farming practice, and it's extremely effective.
You're talking
However,
about
it's
predatory
not,
bugs specifically?
yeah, predatory bugs and specifically predatory bugs. And the problem with that is that it's a forethought thing. So it's not, oh, I got this going on, I'm going to come in, after I already have a problem and try and catch up. And that has a cost associated with it, where I'm going to, pay for this predatory population to be established.
This is preventative.
So there's challenges to that. Preventative measures not all farmers are thinking that way, and that's a challenge. There's something new that's come out of South Korea, new to us. There's a son of one of my teachers in natural farming, Cho Hon Yu. He's kind of the initiator or creator of the Korean iteration of this natural farming practice, tending to the microbial life, which is based a lot on Japanese enzyme theory and a lot of things that were carried on, scientific practices before we had giant universities with
wow,
our current model of research,
education and knowledge.
They've been passed down, and farmers are some of the best scientists because they observe, they only carry on what works. And so some of these traditional things, though they're not readily accepted by the academic community without papers, are very much science, which is the study of nature through observation and experimentation. And so you have, really, really good stuff. The more I dig into it, the more solidly I find it into natural science. But the son of this man, his name is Cho Yun Sun, saw some of the pushback Dad was getting, and went to school to be a chemical engineer. But then couldn't leave his agricultural roots and went into exploring natural pesticides, using chemistry, but also using what nature already provides, biochemistry. And so he has created a swath of natural pesticides. His organization is JADAM, JADAM, and a lot of the information is in Korean. Much of it's coming out in English. You can get his book on Amazon. But he has a suite of pesticides that have gone under rigorous testing to do the least amount of damage to beneficial insect populations while being highly effective against your pests. So there's research being done with County of Hawaii and University of Hawaii on the coffee borer beetle that had a ton of success. I think that research just finished, and there'll be a paper coming out on that. But there's some really cool research being done around the Jadon pesticide suite right now as well.
And these are pesticide inputs derived from naturally occurring weeds and local indigenous plants. Is that what I'm gathering?
They make an organic surfactant, and then depending on what your crop is, and depending on what your pest is, there's different levels, because you want to use as the least potent thing that will be 100% effective. So right. There's kind of stronger stuff, but that stronger stuff will also knock out maybe some of your beneficials. Whereas if you just have aphids or mites, maybe you only need, like, for example, aphids would be taken out by Jerusalem artichoke, basically a concentrate of the effective biochemicals in Jerusalem artichoke.
Wow.
Are sprayed on with a surfactant, and you have a full kill, and you can tend to that. Jerusalem artichoke can also be used to prevent apple coddling moth. In Hawaii, I think they were using a combination of this amyloid-approved sulfur with Jerusalem artichoke and having like a 98% kill on coffee borer beetle.
Wow, man, that is fascinating stuff. I guess it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's toxicities everywhere in nature to different species. You know what I mean?
Totally, but they're not toxic to humans. They don't create brain diseases and
Right.
all these weird things that we're getting out of some of the stuff we're using. And so, yeah, it is. There's tools, but we need to educate.
Do you
And
feel
it
like
needs
we're
to be
there?
seen
Do you feel like if we
possible.
get this education out, if we get Suzanne Wainwright speaking up there and educating farmers on all the latest practices, I know it's not, you couldn't do away with it overnight. You can't do away with it completely, I'm sure, these heavy pesticides, I mean. But do you think we're at the point where we could really get past most of this stuff here in 2019?
You know, I don't think we'll get past it here in 2019. I'm not sure. I know there's a lot of powers in this whole equation. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of money involved, and I say, you know, teach the giant organizations that make a lot of money all at the same time, and get them all product lines that are healthy for us. And but I think for hope's sake, you know, to speak of hope, I think that my children will have a place where everybody knows you don't spray that on plants. We eat those plants. You know, everybody knows that's not good for you. So we're going to eat the ones. I mean, society has chosen organic.
Yes.
You know, everybody is scrambling to be organic because when there's stuff on the shelf, people choose it. And so, yeah, I think that we're definitely moving in that direction. I think that regulations, money, and some things are understandably going to be,
Barriers.
a normal delay, in our society. And I think it's just, patience and persistence.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Super, super enlightening for me and my audience.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Jordan. Thanks for talking.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for more Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. We'll see you next time. This is Jordan River and Chris Trump signing off, saying have a great day.